Hello, how you doing, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between? You know what I mean. Oh God, he's not gonna start singing, is he? Nope, I'm not. Just get a little vocal warm up. Hey ho ha hum ha hum. Red leather, yellow leather, copper kettle, green. Red leather, yellow leather, copper kettle, blue. Yeah. Oh boy. Boy. Just watching a thing about a woman who stabbed a kid for no apparent reason. Well, she needed a place to stay. That's the reason. It's awful. It's fucked up. Hey, speaking of fucked up, welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast. I'm your host, Mike Lucht, and this episode, we're going to delve into something that I've been wondering a bit about, I've been wondering about this quite a bit lately. What is the deal with the connection between true crime and Mormonism? Because you see a lot. It happens quite a bit. And I'm going to frame this particular odd intersection with a particular crime that happened in the 70s, I believe. Late 70s, early 80s. So without further ado, let's jump right in. In 1977, a story broke that would shock England, America, probably Canada, maybe also, I don't know, and tabloids around the world. It involved Joyce McKinney, former Miss Wyoming, because, anyone who's a Miss State or Nation, they tend to be usually the cream of the crop of humanity, the best of the best. So former Mormon, a foreman, and a figure whose life would straddle criminal accusation and celebrity obsession. McKinney was already a figure of curiosity. Tall, striking, articulate. You'd have to be to become Miss Wyoming of all 50 states. Wyoming. Come on. But her name would enter the annals of true crime, not for pageantry, but for a bizarre and highly publicized act of alleged violence and coercion. An act that the press would dub the Mormon sex kidnapping. Couldn't put it better myself. The story, as reported, was extraordinary. Joyce McKinney had allegedly kidnapped Kirk Anderson, a young Mormon missionary in England, because if anywhere needs the word of the Latter-day Saints, it's England. And she held him against his will in her Cornwall estate. Oh, Cornwall. I already ate. It's fine. Tabloids described the abduction with lurid details, chains, photographs, ships, ritualized seduction, whips, and claims of brainwashing. Headlines screamed across continents. Quote, Mormon girl kidnap horror. It's a little misleading. You'd think that a Mormon girl was kidnapped, but no. In this instance, the Mormon girl is the kidnapper, not the kidnappee. Other tabloids read, quote, American beauty queen in British sex scandal. Probably not the first time. Maybe the first we've heard about, but not the first time, I'm sure. See the Profumo affair. Within weeks, McKinney had become a tabloid icon of obsession, sex, and scandal. A character both vilified and fetishized. Her story was carried on the front pages of the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Times, and the New York Post, often accompanied by photographs that framed her as both femme fatale and a criminal mastermind. It might be going a bit far, but hey, I'm no tabloid writer. Beyond the sensationalism, the case touched on deeper currents, the intersection of religion, sexuality, and media morality. McKinney was a former member of the Church of Jesus Cristo of Latter-day Saints. Her alleged victim, Kirk Anderson was an active member of the Church of Jesus Cristo of Latter-day Saints and a Mormon missionary. To the public imagination, this was not just a crime. It was a transgression of sacred moral order. We know how those kick people up in a tizzy. Doesn't take much to spark people's outrage. And this was in the 70s. So imagine if this went on today. My goodness. Anywho, it was a violation amplified because it occurred within a highly visible religious context. Yet, as extraordinary as the allegation seemed, the details of McKinney's life would only become stranger. She would evade prosecution for a time, recast herself in the media, and decades later become the subject of Errol Morris's 2013 documentary Tabloid, a film that blurred the line between crime story and tragicomic legend. According to British police reports and contemporary newspaper accounts, in the spring of 1977, Joyce McKinney lured Kirk Anderson from his missionary work in London under the pretense of companionship. Okay. She then allegedly transported him to her cottage in Cornwall. I would just say gave him a ride. That's weird. It's weird they say transported him, but I guess in the context of a crime occurring, it just automatically turns into transporting someone. The reports are strange, even by true crime standards. Chains and photographs were allegedly used in an attempt to coerce him into sexual activity. Anderson later escaped, went to the police, claiming he had been drugged, restrained, and pressured into sexual acts against his will. British authorities pursued the case with urgency, and international coverage quickly followed. By some accounts, McKinney fled before facing formal charges in England, sparking an international manhunt. Does not bode well for perceptions of innocence. But I'm no Miss Wyoming, so what do I know? Interpol records and subsequent investigative journalism suggest she returned to the United States, evading extradition. The story exploded in tabloid newspapers, framing McKinney as once again, a femme fatale, a dangerous seductress, a criminal genius, often without the balanced context modern investigative journalism demands. A lot of that missing from today's media landscape. Her beauty queen image, combined with her apparent charisma, made for irresistible storytelling. Errol Morris, decades later, would frame the narrative in Tabloid as a combination of media myth-making, personal obsession, and public fascination. Interviews with McKinney, her family, and former acquaintances reveal her own complex self-fashioning, a woman who understood and in some ways exploited the spectacle she had become. The case also reflects a broader cultural phenomena of the time, the tabloidization of morality and crime. Stories involving sex, religion, and transgression, especially when the perpetrator is a woman, were amplified far beyond their actual legal weight. McKinney's alleged victim, the young Mormon missionary, became a figure of symbolic innocence, while McKinney herself became a canvas for societal fears about sexuality, female autonomy, and deviance. Can't have broads going around, exercising their autonomous sexuality. At least not when they kidnap a Mormon missionary for sexual reasons. You got to draw the line somewhere. While widely vilified, McKinney's legal record was complex. She avoided trial for the 1977 abduction, partly by fleeing the country with a fake passport, which did little to preserve public perceptions of innocence once again. Later, she was charged with vehicular manslaughter, following the death of a 91-year-old Holocaust survivor. Of all the people you could hit with your car, that's got to be one of the worst. As of 2020, man, oh God, can you imagine just living through all that horror and just nightmare on Earth of a concentration camp, of the Holocaust, only to be hit by some fucking goofy Miss Wyoming Mormon broad in what I'm sure was an SUV. But I digress. As of 2020, she was committed to a psychiatric facility, reflecting ongoing legal and mental health interventions. Despite these developments, McKinney remained a figure of public fascination. Her life, a continuous intersection of scandal, eccentricity, putting it nicely, and myth-making. McKinney's story was unusual in its strangeness and media attention, but it fits into a broader pattern of sensationalized true crime connected to Mormonism or Mormon-adjacent groups. Over the decades, the press has repeatedly fixated on crimes where religion, extremism, or sectarian culture heightens the narrative drama. Let's look at a few examples. You have the Lafferty murders in the 1970s. Ron and Dan Lafferty. They already sound like a couple of winners, don't they? Ron and Dan Lafferty. Brothers from a fundamentalist Mormon background in Utah. Now, when you hear the words fundamentalist and Mormon in the same sentence, you can probably predict that trouble's around the corner. Anywho, they committed one of the most shocking family murders of the era. They killed their sister-in-law, Brenda Lafferty, and her unborn child, claiming that they were acting on direct divine instruction. Their religious justification created intense public fascination and horror, of course, as it suggested a deadly, literal interpretation of their faith. The media framed the murders as the ultimate expression of extremist piety gone wrong. Stories highlighted how the Lafferty's religious zeal combined with family loyalty to produce a very horrific outcome. The press often sensationalized the spiritual claims, focusing less on psychological or sociological context and more on the dramatic clash between innocence and divine-inspired violence. The case set a template in the public imagination: faith, prophecy, and murder intertwined, capturing both tabloid attention and scholarly interest in religious extremism. Then there's Ervil LeBaron, who already sounds like a bad guy just from his name. Ervil LeBaron. One letter away from... He's almost Baron Evil. I'm just going to say, it's Baron Evil. Baron Evil was the leader of a polygamous Mormon offshoot sect who orchestrated multiple murders over decades to consolidate his quote-unquote prophetic authority. His victims included rival sect members, former followers, and even family members who defied him. You don't defy Baron Evil. LeBaron's rigid interpretation of divine law justified, in his mind, extreme violence. Blood atonement, I believe it's called, in the Latter-day Saints faith. Media coverage emphasized his charismatic authority and the exoticism of polygamy, painting him as both dangerous and deeply devout, which you'd be surprised how often those two overlap. Tabloids and mainstream outlets alike focused on his ability to manipulate and coerce followers, presenting a sensational portrait of religious fanaticism. LeBaron's crimes underscored recurring themes in Mormon-adjacent criminal coverage: the combination of charismatic leadership, doctrinal extremism, and ritualized violence, providing a stark contrast between public piety and clandestine atrocity. And then there's the far more recent in memory, let's say, exploits of Chad and Lori Daybell. Chad and Lori Daybell rose to national infamy through accusations of ritualized murder intertwined with apocalyptic beliefs. Though not formally aligned with mainstream LDS doctrine, both were culturally influenced by Mormon-adjacent communities and fringe end-times narratives prevalent in American culture. The media narrative fixated on their doomsday obsession, ritualized killings, and alleged manipulation of their followers. Coverage emphasized the blend of ideological extremism and family violence, drawing connections, whether explicit or implied, to their religious background. Their story highlights modern iterations of the sensationalistic pattern: apocalyptic beliefs plus family or sexualized violence plus media spectacle equals total shit show, showing that Mormon-adjacent cases remain a persistent narrative draw. Another example, and this one particularly This one particularly gets to me because this guy was just such a fuck. Using the word pussy to describe someone as a pejorative does a disservice to vaginas the world around, especially with this particular character. Joshua Powell murdered his wife, Susan Cox Powell, before killing himself and their 2 children in a deliberate house explosion. The case shocked the nation not only for the violence, but also for the disturbing involvement of Joshua's father, who had secretly recorded his daughter-in-law and engaged in other, well, let's just say morally and legally questionable, just rather dubious behavior. Let's just say he wasn't just recording his daughter-in-law. There was recordings of other neighborhood individuals of a young age. The Powells, part of Utah's Mormon communities, which media often highlighted as a backdrop, creating tension between faith-based public image and private atrocity. Coverage repeatedly emphasized the extreme betrayal and familial dysfunction alongside the murder-suicide perpetrated by this heinous sack of shit, Joshua Powell. This case illustrates how modern sensationalized coverage layers religion, domestic violence, and voyeuristic scandal to produce a gripping yarn, narratives of crime that dominate the headlines. Then there's the Children of Thunder, 2 brothers who committed multiple murders and at least 1 attempted bank fraud, attempting to cash a victim's check. They were raised in a Mormon-adjacent fundamentalist community. Their criminality was framed in the media as an extreme outcome of secrecy and religious strictures. Coverage emphasized their off-the-grid lifestyle, their adherence to strict religious codes, and the escalating criminal acts, producing a narrative of escalating tension and danger. Analysts often contextualize the story with a pattern of isolated, ideologically motivated crime in fundamentalist Mormon communities. The case demonstrates how media coverage repeatedly highlights violence and financial or social manipulation, as well as religious extremism, as a sensationalistic package, feeding the public appetite for scandal. And then there's Mark Hoffman, a documented forger in Utah, who committed murder to conceal his fraudulent manipulation of Mormon historical texts. Hoffman's crimes were shocking not only because of the murders, but because they involved the deliberate alteration of sacred historical documents, which threatened institutional credibility. We know that the Latter-day Saints movement has credibility out the yin-yang, baby. Media coverage emphasized the combination of religious, historical, and criminal intrigue, focusing on Hoffman's intellect, charm, and capacity for deception. Public fascination was intensified by the intersection of religion, scholarship, and lethal criminality. Hoffman's case is remembered as a rare blend of intellectual fraud and violence, illustrating the continuing media focus on religious intrigue as a sensational hook. This is the man who came up with a story that Joseph Smith, old Joe Smith, didn't receive the instructions to start a religion from an angel, but rather from an alchemical elemental known as a salamander. And yes, it's pretty much the same thing as a lizard, but it's a lizard that lives in fire, which I think is a much cooler hook for your religion, but they want to couch themselves in pre-existing Christianity. Plus, Joe Smith didn't know the whole salamander side of things. He couldn't have known that Hoffman was going to make this up. But if he could have known, if he could have looked in that magic hat and said, "Damn salamander, now that's a hook," I would have gone with that. But that's just me. Then there's Elizabeth Smart. Elizabeth Smart's abduction at age 14 by Brian David Mitchell in Utah captured national attention for its duration and circumstances. She was held for 9 months and endured extreme isolation and abuse. While Mitchell was not a Mormon, Smart's Utah LDS community was highlighted in media coverage as a point of cultural context. The story reinforced familiar tabloid motifs: young innocents violated, religious and cultural backdrop, creating a story that was at once tragic, sensational, and symbolic. Coverage amplified the contrast between community values and the crime's brutality. And then there's Arthur Gary Bishop, who's raised in Utah Mormon communities, committed several murders of children. His upbringing and religious association became a focal point in media coverage, emphasizing the dissonance between his devout environment and his heinous acts. Analyses often speculated on whether religious context had any causal role, but media largely framed it as a compelling narrative device. Devout exterior masking deadly intent. Bishop's case has since become a textbook example of religious cultural framing in crime reporting. And then you have another just awful piece of shit. This man is, he's just disgusting on every level. And that's Warren Jeffs, who led the FLDS Church, enforcing polygamy, underage marriages, and sexual abuse. Media coverage extensively highlighted the church's isolation, extreme hierarchy, and Jeff's authoritarian control. But honestly, listeners, look up a picture of this man, listen to him talk, and answer me honestly if this man exudes anything even remotely approaching authority, let alone religious authority. A prophet, he is not. The combination of religious extremism and sexualized exploitation plus institutional secrecy ensured sustained sensationalism. Jeff's trial and subsequent imprisonment cemented his story as a modern archetype of Mormon-adjacent criminality in media reporting. And then also, in much more recent memory, although you could be using that memory to store like how to do math, good. Excuse me, maths for our across the pond listener. Not just that one guy, I promise. A string of incidents involving Mormon-affiliated women gaining social media attention, some implicated in criminal acts or unusual behavior, became media spectacles. This would be the mom-fluencer incidents throughout the 2010s and 2020s. Coverage emphasized the contrast between public piety and scandalous acts, often leveraging social media as a magnifier for traditional tabloid fascination. These cases exemplify the modern continuation of patterns: faith, family, scandal, and public spectacle combined to generate national and international headlines. Now, a lesser knowns instances, which I found while looking into this cross-section between Mormonism and true crime, two names you've probably heard of. One, Theodore Bundy, one of history's most infamous serial killers, reportedly explored Mormonism during his youth. Now, correlation is not causation, but I ask you, is it? While Bundy's crimes were not religiously motivated, media occasionally highlighted this minor affiliation, particularly in early psychological and biographical profiles. This demonstrates that even minimal religious association can be framed as part of a larger sensational narrative, especially when juxtaposed with extreme criminality. And then there's another guy a lot of you have maybe heard of before. Goes by the name of David Koresh. I think his real name was Captain Retardo, something to that effect. That was his nickname in high school, at least. David Koresh led the Branch Davidians, a sect that practiced polygamy and apocalyptic prophecy, culminating in the 1993 Waco siege. Though not LDS, Koresh's sect is often described as Mormon adjacent due to cultural and historical similarities. Media coverage fixated on apocalypticism, polygamy, and religious fanaticism, constructing a narrative that reinforced public fascination with sectarian extremism. Koresh's story remains a touchstone for how media blends religion and sensationalized crime for maximum impact. Now, returning to the case of Joyce McKinney, her alleged crimes, legal troubles, and media presence exemplify the public fascination with scandal and transgression. She became a public property of spectacle, embodying beauty, sexuality, and religious transgression that tabloids could not resist. In fact, after being the central role in Errol Morris's film documentary Tabloid, this well, I don't. I'm going to throw a big smelly allegedly in there because everything I've seen is that she still allegedly commit acts of rape on her captive. But either way, the central role that she took in Errol Morris's Tabloid documentary paints this alleged rapist as something of a curiosity, just a protagonist of any kind, which is just strange and horrifying and ridiculous. But the film, the documentary Tabloid, it reframes her story, presenting McKinney as both an unreliable narrator and a self-fashioned celebrity. We don't have enough of those today.
Like and subscribe.
Decades after the original events, her enduring presence illustrates that media does not merely report crime, but it creates the legend. The red thread connecting McKinney to other Mormon-focused cases is not the crime itself, but the way society amplifies certain stories. Religious difference, perceived moral strictness, and exoticized cultural practices provide fertile ground for sensationalism. McKinney's tabloid fame and the reoccurrence of Mormon-associated stories and headlines reflect the intersection of cultural anxiety, media spectacle, and human fascination with transgression. Across time, the public is captivated not solely by crimes, by the juxtaposition of innocence, faith, and deviance. Joyce McKinney remains emblematic of this pattern: criminal, charismatic, and mythologized. The archetype repeated in other cases, whether through polygamous sects, abductions, or extreme cult leaders. Once again, I'll say, this is why I have certain reservations about covering true crime more often than not, because part of me feels like it's feeding the monster. But this monster is already morbidly obese. There's nothing that I can do or not do that's going to stop that feeding frenzy. Sources include Wikipedia, the Manacled Mormon case, TheGuardian.com, 2011, McKinney Mormon Missionary Sex Tabloid, TheGuardian.com, 2011, Errol Morris Tabloid, Joyce McKinney, Time.com, Tabloid, The Honey Blonde and the Manacled Mormon, Wired.com, Errol Morris Tabloid, VanityFair.com, Sex, Bondage, and Dog Cloning, Errol Morris Finds the Common Ground. Your guess is as good as mine, folks. I didn't really see anything about dog cloning, but yeah. And LDS Daily, 10 infamous Latter-day Saints criminals. Yeah, I mostly just wanted to create this episode to address the reoccurring intersection of Mormonism and true crime. It's so strange that some of the biggest stories in true crime over the last several decades delve directly into Mormonism or have as their central character a Mormon. Even if it's not, fundamentalist or some strange splinter sect. Joshua Powell, that pusillanimous human being, if you can call him that, is a perfect example. Just watching the videos of this man and how he lived his life and knowing how he lived his life, it's just, he represents a lot, in my mind, of what is wrong with men and masculinity today. He is the perfect uber example of what not to be. And his wife knew. She knew, like she said in home videos, if something happens to me, Josh did it. So, I guess that's going to do it for today's episode. I don't know. I will come back and explore this topic more in depth, but I'm working on gearing up towards the next multi-part series, and I just wanted to put something out, keep something going for the week. But we're going to close out with a little ditty by Joshua Powell's father, a certified fucking nut job, that I believe he wrote about his daughter-in-law. It goes a little something like this. This actually features Susan Powell on backup vocals, which, good Lord, just, my God. But it's no wonder that Joshua Powell turned out the fucking way he did if this is his dad. So. Crikey. My name's Michael Lux. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, and we'll see you on the next one. I may have seemed clumsy, I didn't move fast. A love that came slow is a love that will last. It's plain to me too that all that you do has made me love you. I only feel love. I only feel love when I'm with or without you. I only feel love for that something about you. I only feel love for you. True love doesn't.